right. Welcome everyone to a Fiction Lab webinar slash workshop. We do a lot of workshops, got a podcast going. Seth was actually on this week's podcast, and we've got another one planned for a few weeks out, so very exciting. But I'm actually gonna just lead it on over to Seth and let him introduce himself and tell us a little bit about what he's got planned today.
Sure. So my name is Seth, and if you haven't seen the or listened to the podcast, I'm a full-time author. I've written 40 some books in the
Whoa.
science fiction fantasy space. I have been writing since probably 2015, but I've been publishing since the very end, December of 2018. So uh, during that time, I've spent a lot of my energy and effort on uh, figuring out how to write quickly and write well and also not hate it. Um, and so, what I'm going to be talking about today is really just productivity in writing. And that's a very broad topic. So, we're going to be narrowing it down and trying to hit sort of three key points: a concept called flow, how to generate effortless creativity in your writing. And the third, and probably the most important, is how to enjoy your writing over the long term. Uh, I think it's really important that as we establish writing careers, we don't burn ourselves out. We aim for longevity. Um, there's a sort of a popular story that we sometimes encounter where somebody is is writing a book and then they publish the book and they have instant success and they have so much success that they never again need to do anything, right? They never have to write another book. They never have to sell anything to anybody ever again. But for the absolute mass majority of us, that's not the case. After we write one book, we publish it, and then we wake up the next morning and discover that we have to write another book and another one after that and another one after that and another one after that. And whether you write, you know, uh, 5 to 10 books a year or one book a year or even one book every 2 or 3 or 4 years, if you want to have a long-term writing career, you just have to keep releasing books, right? That's sort of part of the job description, is to continue writing. And really early on in my transition to being a full-time author, I realized that there were a lot of frustrations that came along with being a writer that I just hadn't anticipated. There were a lot of frustrations around the ebb and flow of creativity. There were a lot of frustrations about how quickly I could produce work that was up to my standard. Um, there were a lot of frustrations around how long it seemed to take to get better as a writer. And so, because I have a bit of a background in process improvement and generalized improvement and business development, I I sat back one day when I was just incredibly frustrated with myself, and I said, "Okay, wait a second. In my previous life, in my job before I was a writer, I figured out a bunch of ways to improve what I was doing because I worked as a programmer, and programming, writing code, is very similar to writing in a lot of ways, and a lot of the frustrations are similar. Sometimes you just stare at your code and you're like, this should work, but it doesn't work, and I have no idea why it doesn't work. And then you spend like 14 hours scrolling through line by line until you find the one error that's keeping the entire thing from working, right? And then you kick yourself um, because it took you so long to find. And sometimes stories are like that, where we'll sit and we'll stare at our manuscript, or we'll stare at our screen that's empty, our lack of manuscript, and we're trying to work through the creative process and it's just not working. It's just not coming. And so the question is, how do we, in the face of those frustrations, right, the creative frustrations, create a life for ourselves that is positive more than it is negative, right? That is enjoyable more than it is frustrating. Because humans won't continue to do frustrating things if there isn't enough of a reward to keep them there, right? And so if you just bang your head over and over and over again, you are going to find yourself slowing down. You're going to find yourself less willing to sit at your computer and write or pick up your pen to write. You're going to find that you don't want to talk to people about your books, that you're not as excited about your stories, right? These frustrations can build and can become a real impediment to success as an author. So the question is, how do we avoid that? How do we get around that? So again, we're going to be talking about three things today. We're going to be talking about flow. We're going to be talking about how to generate effortless creativity. And we're going to be talking about enjoying writing. And I am, I mean, like every person in existence, I can only speak from uh, my experience and what I know. And writing is such an intensely personal thing that what you're going to want to do as you're listening is you're going to want to take down the information or mentally record the information, and then you're going to want to just ask the question, all right, how does this mirror my experiences and how do I apply these principles to my life? Not how do I copy the exact thing that this other person has done, but how do I make sure that I can apply the principle behind what is being done, right? Me giving you an exact blueprint of my writing routine is just not going to be helpful, except in that you can look at it and say, okay, what are some of the principles behind this that I can adopt into my own life that are going to allow me uh, to better do the thing I want to do? In this case, writing, having a career, selling books, that kind of stuff. So we're going to start with flow. The question is, what is flow? Well, flow is something that everybody has experienced. All of us have experienced it. And in fact, I would be willing to wager that you are only a writer who is pursuing being an author, or publishing books at least, because you have experienced flow. So, flow is, in short, optimal experience. The best way to describe it is it's the feeling you have when time just vanishes, right? You sit down to do something, you're like, I'm going to start writing, and you start writing, and all of a sudden you look up, and an hour has passed or 2 hours has passed, and you have way more done than you thought you were going to have done. And you've had no distractions, your mind has been 100% engaged. Or if any distractions showed up, you just bounced right off of them and went right back to what you were doing. If you've ever had the experience of, and it could be writing, it could be something else, of all of a sudden time slows down and it's like every detail is in focus and you have absolute awareness of everything that's happening around you and you're sort of existing effortlessly in that space. And most importantly, you know exactly what to do. You know exactly how to react in whatever situation it is. That is also flow. So anytime our experience of life either shrinks down to a single point or widens out until we can see everything, that is flow. That is optimal experience. So flow is a concept that was first introduced by, I mean, humans have known about it for a long time and they've called it a lot of different things. But as a psychological term, it was first coined by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is a very hard name to pronounce. But he wrote this book called Flow, and it is it is absolutely worth reading. If you are not as interested in a sort of more technical book, because this is very much a technical book, um, he has an audiobook that is really just a series of lectures that he gave. It's a lot more informal on this subject, so it's a little bit easier to listen to. It's not quite as precise if you're looking for the actual mechanics, like to understand the mechanics of flow. But Flow for me was an absolutely life-changing book. In short, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I think I'm going to share my screen. unless I accidentally closed the window that I was hoping to share. I even went through and I prepped all of this ahead of time. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so all of you can see it. Hopefully you guys can see that. Um,
Yes.
so this is flow. Okay. Flow exists in a space where the challenge of the activity and your level of skill are properly matched and a reward exists that you want. Okay. You can also see here, though, that uh, the two main distractors for that's not what I wanted. The two main distractors for writers also exist here, right? If the challenge level is too high and you don't feel like you can meet the challenge, it starts to introduce anxiety. If the challenge level is too low and your skills are too high, it starts to introduce boredom. This might be hard to believe depending on where you are in your writer's journey, but a real reason that authors stop writing books is because it's boring. We think to ourselves when we're starting out as writers that we love writing so much, we're always going to love it. We love telling our stories. But if you're finding yourself after you've written a couple of books just feeling very resistant to the idea of sitting down and writing more, it's probably because your brain knows that you can do it. And the reward for doing it is just not as high because you've already done it before, right? Writing your first book is insanely exciting. To finish a manuscript is like, it's something that is very rare in the world. And so it comes with all of these positive feelings. But what happens when you've done it a couple of times? What happens when you've done it 40 times, right? All of a sudden, you have a different problem. And instead of anxiety, because the challenge is too high, which is where the majority of amateurs and the majority of people who are just starting to write their books or are in their first book, anxiety is typically the reason they don't write. Boredom can become the reason you don't write. Okay. And so the flow channel is this sweet spot where you are mirroring the difficulty level, the challenge level, and your level of skill. Okay. And this is really important because flow isn't something that just happens by serendipity. Flow is something that happens when those two conditions are met, which means that uh, we can manufacture those conditions. We can manufacture the difficulty level and we can manufacture our skill level, right? Our skill level goes up over time, but we can play with the difficulty level. We can reduce the difficulty level if we're feeling anxiety. We can increase the difficulty level if we're feeling boredom. And as we push ourselves towards optimal experience, what's going to happen is that we will naturally want to exist in that state. And so, if you can tune your writing to be a flow producing activity, you will find yourself giving up other activities to go write. It stops becoming a matter of how do I convince myself to write? It's how do I drag myself away from it? Because our brains naturally want to be in flow. They naturally want to be in this sweet spot where our entire focus is completely captured by whatever it is we're doing, and we are 100% invested in it. Our brains love it because of all the chemicals that it releases and that make us happy, right? And we can be in the middle of it, and sometimes you're in flow, and what you're doing is really hard, but your skill set is just good enough that you can actually achieve it. And then you feel even better about it. So even then, with little bits of frustration, writing can become this incredible activity that you just want to do more and more and more and more of. Okay. So when you're talking about productivity, at the end of the day, what you want to be optimizing for are these two levers. First is difficulty, and the second is skill. How good are you at writing? And that can be from a technical perspective, and that can be from a story perspective, right? If you like, so when I was younger, I was a terrible writer. Uh, what I discovered when I got older, though, was that half of my problem was my literal writing mechanics. Because I wasn't writing on a computer, I was writing with a pen and paper. And then once I did transition to a computer, I was very bad at typing. And so my mechanics, like the actual skill required to write, was what was stopping me from writing. What was fascinating is that as I look back on that time in my life, you could say, Seth, tell me a story. And I could literally just make up a story and keep it going for hours. And I could create a world and I could tell you a story. I had that piece of it down, right? I understood the skill on that side. But what I lacked was the actual mechanical ability to write in a way that met this intersection of challenge and skill with a reward, right? So, as I got into writing, the thing that I ended up working on was not my storytelling. For me, it was my actual mechanics. It was how can I be better at typing? Am I going to continue to, two finger peck at the keyboard, uh, or am I actually going to write with all of my fingers, or like type with all of my fingers? And it's fascinating. When I started working on my typing, all of a sudden writing got way more enjoyable. I know other people who come from the other side, right? They are proficient in typing. They're good at writing by hand. They have good, like they can spell. I was also a horrific speller. Um, so that didn't help either. But I've seen people who come from the other side and are proficient in the task of like typing, but they don't yet have the storytelling sense or the instinctive understanding for plot and character and all of that kind of stuff. And so where they need to work on it on in terms of skill is they need to spend more time on the craft, right? In understanding how words go together, in understanding how to, stitch sentences into paragraphs and paragraphs into chapters and chapters together to create a full-blown story. And so for them, their writing gets better when they start studying how to craft stories, as opposed to me, I had to learn the actual mechanics, right? So, on the skill side, if you're finding yourself anxious or you're finding yourself bored, just ask the question, is this a story that I feel like I can write? Or is this a story that I just don't feel qualified to write? Because I've run into that too, where I'll start writing a story and it's like, oh man, I don't feel like I can tell this story yet. There's something about it that it's beyond me, right? I don't understand it, or I don't know how uh, to paint these pictures that I can see in my head in a way that's going to actually communicate what I want to communicate. And so in that case, when I get to that point, I know that the lever I have to pull is the skill lever, right? Because the challenge is too high and I am not yet skilled enough to be able to do it. Now, one of the things that you can also do, or when you're in that situation, you might say, actually, my skill level is there, right? I have the mechanics, I have the storytelling, I could totally tell this story, but I'm still anxious or I'm still bored, right? If you're bored, then what's probably going on is that the challenge is just not enough, right? You're trying to tell the same story you've told a bunch of different times, or there's just nothing really particularly interesting about the story that you're trying to tell for you, right? It might be interesting for other people, but it's not interesting for you. In that case, what do you need to do? You need to up the challenge of it. Mix in another genre. Set a goal for yourself of writing faster or longer. Set a goal for yourself of subverting the expectations for a particular trope that is common to the genre, right? There are all of these little tweaks you can make to your story, to your book, that increase the challenge, the craft challenge of it. But then there are some other things you can do. I started listening to music. So when I initially I'm very distractible, exceptionally distractible. And so when I started learning how to write, I wrote in absolute silence with essentially just blinders on. Like I could not look if I looked to the side, I would probably stop writing. I would go do something else. So I really trained myself to do that. But then one day I found myself bored with what I was writing. And so what did I do? I just pulled on the challenge lever and I started listening to music. And all of a sudden, because there was music playing, I had to, my brain was like half listening to the music and half focusing on what I was doing. And it took up more brain space. It became harder to write. And I started writing better as a result. I started writing longer as a result because my skill level had increased, but the challenge had not increased. So now I'm constantly looking at these two things, right? When I'm thinking about my flow state, I'm constantly looking at these two things, the challenge and my skill level, and I'm trying to tweak them. So when we're when we're looking at building um, a writing habit that induces flow, the most important thing is to understand what gets us into flow. Okay. Once you're in flow, it's easier to maintain. And over time, you'll find yourself staying in flow longer. Okay. But the real question is, how do we actually get into flow? Well, we get into flow by telling our brains, this is a flow activity. We actually trigger the state in ourselves. Now, when you do an activity that is a flow activity, um, so for example, uh, I really like dancing. I like swing dancing. And for me, hearing the first few notes of the song and being on the dance floor in position is a flow trigger. Now, it's a flow trigger because I've done it a ton of times, and my body and my mind both know we've experienced flow in this state a whole bunch of times. And so now, as soon as I hear the music, as soon as I feel the floor starting to move because everybody's doing the bounce, I just know that this is going to be a flow. I'm going to be in flow state. And so my brain is like, cool, I'll just shortcut the process and we'll just get there. Well, we can do the same thing with writing. We can establish a trigger or a series of triggers for ourselves that will allow us to just tell our brain, hey, I'm moving into flow state, right? And in order to do this, we're going to be optimizing our habit and we're going to be optimizing our environment. And this is where my experience is only helpful as a general template. It is not helpful in the specifics because I can't show it to you because it's actually around this wall, but I have a literal cubicle in my office that I built as part of my office that is just three blank white walls and a computer, and there is nothing else there except for my whiteboard where I can track information. And it is Spartan, and there is nothing creative, and there is nothing to inspire me because over time I've learned that what I need or where I thrive the best is in a white box. And so having a white box around me actually promotes my creativity because it helps me move into flow faster. For other people, you might need the color and the visual chaos in order to make yourself calm so that you can move into flow. right? In order to put yourself in the right mindset. You might need a window that you can look out of. I'm in a basement with no windows. This is what I prefer. Right. You might need something tactile, right? That's nearby that you can manipulate while you're thinking and processing. You might need something. I know people who have built their flow triggers around warm drinks, right? Specific drinks. There are all sorts of different things that you could use as flow triggers. You just want to be consistent. And you want to incorporate as many of your senses as you possibly can, right? So that's why I put on a specific playlist. I write to the same exact playlist every day, and I just write to that playlist because I know that it's interesting enough to keep my brain occupied, but it's familiar enough that I'm not going to be distracted by it. But it's something that's going on and it's requiring that little bit of my attention that I need to be pulled away so that it makes the writing, difficult enough, challenging enough. So you're going to want to identify for yourself and create these triggers that are going to allow you to just slip into flow state, right? Again, first you want to identify, am I on the anxious side? Am I on the bored side? Or am I in flow state, right? Adjust those levers, either the challenge or your skills, to the point where you're experiencing flow on a fairly regular basis, and then say, okay, cool. Now that I'm here, how do I make sure that I get into this place every single time? And the answer is always you just trigger the habits. Now, in Atomic Habits, which I think I talked about in the podcast, I think I talked about in the podcast episode. Um, the author James Clear has something that he calls a habit stack. And it's really simple. You build a bunch of micro habits, really, really small habits that take no effort, and then you link them together so that when you start one, without even thinking about it, you find that you've proceeded through all of them to the end of the chain, right? To the end of the stack. So for me, the habit stack that I built to be able to get into flow is very simple. Wake up in the morning, turn off my alarm, do not look at my phone. That is literally one of my habits is turn off my alarm, do not look at my phone. Okay? Then I go downstairs, I get dressed, I go downstairs, I make a cup of coffee. I take the cup of coffee, and when I'm waiting for the cup of coffee, I literally just pace back and forth in my kitchen. Right? So I don't get involved in anything else. I just pace back and forth, back and forth. Then I get my coffee. I go downstairs to my office. I turn on the lights, put my cup of coffee down on the table, sit down, turn on the computer, open up all of the things that I need to start writing. And then, as soon as those things pop up, I just start writing. And so, from the time and timing wise, that's how I prefer to work, right? And so maybe it might be different for you. You might be writing at a different time of day, but the process is the same. After I eat breakfast, so I write in the mornings for about an hour, and then I go and I eat breakfast. And then at 7 o'clock, it's time to go back to work. So what do? I get another cup of coffee. I carry my coffee downstairs. I sit down at my computer. Everything's on already. And so I can just start writing. But at 7, I don't do that. Instead, I open up my stream and I hit start streaming. And then as soon as I hit start streaming, it's time to start running sprints. And so I do writing sprints, right? But in both of these cases, if I didn't actually do this set of habits, if I deviate, I'm much less likely to start writing. I'm sure you've all had the experience of of having full intention to go and write and then just not doing it. You find yourself pulled this way or that way or distracted by this or you're like, "Oh, I'll just look at this really quick." And then like 45 minutes have passed and your time to write is essentially over. Building a habit stack, right? This small set of habits, each one is, being minuscule, is going to allow you to just pull yourself into writing over and over again. But more importantly, it'll pull you into flow over and over again. And so I can say that um, the mornings that I write are way shorter than the mornings that I don't write. In the mornings when I don't write, I'm aware of time as it passes. But if I sit down to write, if I turn on my stream and I start the sprints and I just get going, 9 times out of 10, the morning is over before I know it. And I have 10,000 words written that I didn't have at when I started. And it's like, as long as I can just put myself into that position, I will get the result. Now, obviously, there are days when I'm interrupted or there are other things going on. And so I only get, you know, some portion of that done. But we're not worried about being perfect. We're just worried about being consistent. We're not worried about, always operating at maximum. We're just worried that we have more good days than bad days, right? So at this point, um, there's a ton of there's a ton of specifics about flow and how to generate flow and how to trigger it and all of that kind of stuff that you can find on the internet or on YouTube or I guess the YouTube is on the internet, or in the book on flow. Um, but the basics are exactly what I've shared, right? Flow is ultimately this intersection between properly calibrated challenge and skill level. And our goal, if we want to increase productivity, should always be to just push ourselves into flow using a series of triggers, right? Using a series of habits, small habits that we build in order to create a uh, a trigger that pulls us immediately into flow. So let's talk really, really quickly about practically how you build a habit stack. You start by writing down everything you do before you start writing. And I mean everything, right? From from the way that you turn on the light to the way that you sit down in your chair to what you turn or what you do when you open your computer and turn it on. Like, do you immediately click on your browser to just see what's on there? Don't do that. Do you, immediately click on your messaging apps to see what's going on? Do you open your laptop, hit your button to open whatever writing program you're going to be writing in, and then pick up your phone while you're waiting for it to load in the like 15 seconds that it's going to take you to load everything in, and then spend, 20 minutes looking at your phone while, everything's loaded and ready to go? Because I know I do. So the question is, how do we eliminate all of these things, right? How do we eliminate all of the distractions, all of the things that are going to keep us from getting into flow? Well, we write them down. And then we just take a marker and we cross them out, right? We say, I don't want to do this. 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 And then what we're left with, the essential path that that we take, we start linking those things together. And you actually write the list out again. And so for me, my list looks like I wake up and then I turn off my phone or I turn off my alarm without looking at my phone. And then I go downstairs. And then I start my coffee. And then I pace around the kitchen. And then I get my coffee and go downstairs. And literally what we're doing in our mind by writing it out this way is we are linking together each of these activities in a way that's going to naturally lead into the next activity. Because because our brain is starting to associate, hey, when I get my coffee, I'm going downstairs, we will start getting our coffee and going downstairs without pausing to do something else, right? It just becomes a natural progression. So then the question is, but how do we avoid just falling into the same bad habits that we have already built, right? I would highly recommend Atomic Habits. It is undoubtedly, without question, the single best habit book in existence. Um, but to just sort of give you the really easy answer is you make the triggers invisible. So if you have the issue where when you open up your computer and you start loading your writing program, you pick up your phone to check it, don't have your phone within reach. Leave it outside the door to the room, right? Write on your habit stack. I go downstairs or I go to my office or I go to the couch where I'm going to be writing and I leave my phone on the table before I get there. And then I sit down on the couch and I open up my laptop and I load up the writing software. And now that you're sitting on the couch with the with the laptop on your lap and you're loading the writing software, even though you have to wait 15 seconds, because you can't reach your phone, it puts this little wall up that says, "Oh, I'm not going to get up and go do that. I'm not going to put my computer aside, stand up, walk over and get my phone and look at it because now I'm conscious of it." Right? Now I'm aware of it. And so I'm not going to do that. And then some days you will do that because that's what we do. But that's okay. You just want to, as much as possible, eliminate all of those triggers that are sending you in the wrong direction and introduce all of these triggers that are sending you in the right direction. I will say, just as a sort of a capstone to this piece of this, because I really do want to talk about the other things. I got a little bit overexcited about flow. Not having my phone within reach, and in my case, not even having my phone where I can hear it, has been the single greatest productivity hack I have come across. So do with that what you will. I know not everybody is in a position where they can have their phone away from them, but figuring out ways to, as much as possible, minimize it as a distraction, I think is super important for being a writer in our day and age. So let's talk really quickly. We'll change gears here about effortless creativity because these things go hand in hand. Establishing a set of flow triggers for yourself and building a writing space that is going to promote flow will also then promote creativity. The greatest weapon a creative has is boredom. And I know that in our day and age, that is a hard thing to act on. It's not a hard thing for people to grasp. When I say that boredom is our greatest weapon, I get a lot of people who nod along. But to intentionally put yourself in a situation where you have no distractions, nothing that can pull your mind away, that forces you to exist with your own thoughts, that is hard to do. It is genuinely hard to do. But one of the cool things about being aggressive about fine-tuning the triggers in your life and working on your habits is you will naturally start to put yourself in that situation. You will naturally start to erase the constant prompts that the modern life is throwing at you to be distracted. The entire world, specifically in the West, but really the entire world, has become sort of infected by a particular way of interacting with the world that encourages the fracture of our focus. It really encourages that we pay attention to a million things all at once. I think it was Confucius who said that a man who chases two rabbits will catch neither. And we are chasing 1,000 rabbits every day at all times, right? There's this constant pull in all sorts of different directions that, this constant assault on us. And so if you can simply eliminate as many of those distractions as possible, as many of the things that pull your attention as possible, all of a sudden you're going to find that your mind gets really frustrated, gets really angry, and is like, I want to be distracted. I want something to think about. I don't want to sit here in silence. And if you just wait, if you just push it a little bit further, all of a sudden your mind is going to start coming up with the craziest ideas, the most creative work that you've ever done. And the thing is that ideas beget ideas because our brains are connection machines. And so as you come up with one idea and then you come up with another idea, if you're bored, your brain is going to go, oh, well, what if we just took those two ideas and we mashed them together and now here's a third idea? Oh, but then we could take this third idea and we could tweak it slightly and now here's a fourth idea. And then we could take the second idea and the fourth idea and mash them together and here's a fifth idea. And often what we do is we think to ourselves, man, I can't solve this problem. I'm frustrated. And so I'm going to distract myself. My answer to not being able to solve the problem or not being creative in this situation is to just fill my mind with something else because then I don't have to feel bad about it. But if you sit in that feeling bad space, if you sit for a moment in that boredom, you're going to find that your brain just starts to manufacture things. It starts to try to solve the problem. This is one of the reasons, though, that shower thoughts are a thing. Because when you're in the shower, all of a sudden, you're constrained. You don't have the ability to just go and get on your phone or get on your computer or turn on the TV or whatever, right? Enough of your attention is occupied by what you're doing that you start to generate ideas. You start to generate that creativity. So, endless creativity is really an extension of building a life around flow state. And I'm just realizing right now that I haven't actually talked about the intersection between flow state and producing more. So let me just give you an illustration that will hopefully like make that connection and illuminate that for you. So when I started writing, I I was writing maybe 3 books a year. I was writing part time. Uh, so for the first 2 years of my career, I was part time, and I was writing about 3 books a year. And eventually, I got up to 4 books a year, and that was sort of where I maxed out because I spent all of my free time, literally 100% of my free time, writing. And then I became a full-time author, and I went, okay, so now that I'm a full-time author, I should be able to do more, right? And I found myself getting into the like 5 to 6 books. But then I realized that because of all of this other stuff that I had to do as an author, that was really sort of max for me, right? 5 to 6 books. And then I started diving into flow. And then I started diving into these triggers and understanding how all of this went together. And my output went from 2,000 words a day to 10,000 words a day. And then as I continued in this process and as I got better at clicking into flow state and my triggers got more streamlined, my habit stack got more streamlined. All of a sudden, I looked up one day, and this was in 2023, and I realized that I was writing 15,000 words a day consistently. And now, if I'm spending a full day writing, I can write 20,000 words a day and still have time to do a lot of other stuff. Now, part of that is because I moved into dictation, which allows me to write faster. But even before I switched into dictation, I was doing 15,000 words a day typing uh, without significant effort. And I think that that's the important thing, is that when you can understand flow and when you can actually spend the majority of your writing time in flow state, which you absolutely can do, you can actually absolutely train yourself to do this. When you spend the majority of your time writing in flow, it takes so much less effort. It takes so much less energy. You can do it for so much longer. And the time that you do spend there is going to produce more because you're not distracted. Because because you are teaching yourself the skill of producing the thing you want to produce, right? So the reason I talk so much about flow, the reason I talk about this effortless or like building to a place where you can get to effortless creativity is because you will simply produce way more. At my max, I was writing about 16 books a year, um, a bit over 2 million words a year. And I was doing it while also running another company and having getting off every day at 5 so I can have dinner with my family and spending the evenings with my wife and having a thriving life. And that was like I was working Monday through Friday till 5 p.m. and that's it. And so you flow is what allows you to sort of squeeze a lot into what we normally consider to be a small amount of time. We don't need better time management. We don't. What we need is to optimize the time that we actually spend doing the task. And flow is how you do that. Building a flow state for yourself and being able to be just sort of plugged into that flow state whenever you want to be is how you do that. And then the very last thing, because I know I've taken up most of our question time and I apologize. Um, the very last thing is that flow is optimal. I think that's really important for people to understand. And so you will just enjoy your life better if you are in flow more. That's like an ironclad fact. The parts of your life, when you get to the end of your life, the parts of your life that you will describe with the most fondness will be flow activities. And so turning writing into a flow activity means that you're going to want to do it. You're going to enjoy doing it. So I would highly encourage all of you, everybody who listens to this, to just think about how you can get that skill and that difficulty balanced properly, how you can build those triggers to be able to get yourself into that state. And then I would encourage you to just keep working at it because it's going to get easier and easier and easier and easier. And soon you'll be able to write what you want to write when you want to write it.